Welcome everyone to Practical Paths to Flourishing. It's finally time. I'm Brittany Polat, and this is my co-host and co-organizer, Kathryn Koromilas. We are absolutely delighted to be here with you today at this history-making event. Can you believe we're here for the first time at the first ever conference devoted to women and Stoicism? It's about time, right? In the 2,300-year history of Stoicism, this is the first time anyone has gotten together specifically to talk about women and Stoicism. This is our chance to discuss the special challenges we face as women, how Stoicism can help us meet those challenges head on, and how we as flourishing individuals can contribute to a flourishing world.
So what exactly we will be talking about today? Well, the name says it all. We're going to be talking about your experience and what we're going to do today. Why did we see a need for this conference devoted to women and Stoicism? Well, everyone here is probably aware that Stoicism in both ancient and modern times skews heavily masculine. Philosophically, philosophy has historically been very male-oriented and male-dominated, and that trend continues into the 21st century. All of the leading ancient Stoics were men, and very few women were allowed to study philosophy in ancient Greece and Rome, although there were notable exceptions. As a result, only a male perspective is represented in the ancient texts like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations or Epictetus's Discourses. At times, there are even outright misogynistic statements in those ancient texts, which make us cringe today, but which were completely characteristic of the time. So it can be hard sometimes for women to pick up a book on Stoicism and to kind of break through the masculine vibe and connect Stoic principles to their own lives. It may seem irrelevant or even unappealing to women. So all of this adds up to having women underrepresented in the Stoic community even today. That's really unfortunate because all of us here today know how incredibly valuable Stoicism is for every adult human, including women. So one major reason that we're here today is to present Stoicism in a way that's accessible and relevant to women. That's not to say that women can't relate to the Stoic texts in the traditional sense or can't participate equally in the Stoic community at large. Absolutely not. We completely reject any suggestion that this conference represents a watered down or less rigorous version of Stoicism. Stoicism is Stoicism. It has the same underlying principles for everyone. Everyone has their own challenges as they try to live a good life. So what we want in this conference, to do in this conference, is just spotlight the ways that women see Stoicism meeting the challenges of their own lives. We want to amplify voices that have not traditionally been heard and to spotlight a different perspective on a universal philosophy. At the same time that we're celebrating women's voices in the Stoic community, we want to emphasize that we're not excluding the voices of anyone else. We don't see philosophy as a zero-sum game where some people must lose if others win. Instead, we think that when women win, everyone wins too. Women are the glue of society, everyone, and strong, flourishing women equals a strong, flourishing world. So we are here to welcome and include everyone who wants to live a happy life. We're here to help everyone win. We hope that each of you will take this conference as a personal invitation to reach deeper into your Stoic practice and continue your journey toward flourishing.
So, what exactly will we be talking about today? Well, the name says it all: Practical Paths to Flourishing. Kathryn and I were very intentional in choosing the name of this conference because we truly want it to be a source of practical wisdom and inspiration for you. We'll be touching on some Stoic theory today, but for the most part, this is all about practical ways for you to incorporate Stoicism into your life. We also wanted to evoke the idea of a journey. Each of us is on our own lifelong path toward happiness, and each path is both completely unique but also universal. We're all working with the same basic equipment, human nature, and the experience of a human life. But we have slightly different circumstances, and we all have different personal gifts. Many of you may not identify 100% as Stoics, and that's completely fine. You'll hear from some of our speakers today that they don't go around calling themselves Stoics, and that they draw inspiration actually from many other wisdom traditions as well. Some even question a few points of Orthodox Stoicism. This is the beauty of thinking for yourself. Stoicism asks us not to blindly follow someone else's ideas. You just need to understand in your own mind why you believe the things you do. What's important here today is not that you become a card-carrying Stoic, but that you find a philosophy of life that works for you and makes sense for your everyday life. Which leads us to the main component of our conference theme, flourishing. This is how we translate the ancient Greek concept of eudaimonia, which means ultimate happiness in the deep, rich sense of living a good and meaningful life. When people in the 21st century talk about happiness, they usually mean a temporary emotion that results from something external, like eating ice cream or buying a new car. But that's not what Stoics mean by happiness. Stoics say, if your happiness depends on external things, then it can easily be taken away from you. If you really want to be happy, you need to base your happiness on something more stable, something that's completely within your control. So true happiness is not an emotion, but rather a state of mind. It's how you respond to the world, which is completely based on the internal condition of your mind. It's kind of like the old saying, when life hands you lemons, make lemonade. You choose your responses to the world. So you can still make a good response even if life hands you lemons. If you practice enough and use Stoic mental training techniques, you can develop your character and your mindset so you respond well to any challenge life throws at you. Flourishing does not depend on what's going on around you. You could be living through very difficult circumstances, but still flourish because of your internal response to those difficult circumstances. So the idea of flourishing is really fundamental to finding a mindset and a life philosophy that works for you. We have to think about where you're going. Where is your path taking you? And we need to know the steps to take to get there. So Stoicism is kind of like a navigation system that tells us what our destination is and how to get there.
So part of what we're doing at this conference is looking at your journey, your path toward fulfillment and long-lasting happiness, and thinking deeply about how Stoicism can help you get where you're going. All of our talks today are going to give you fuel for this journey. Our speakers will share parts of their own stories and how they apply Stoicism and other philosophies in their lives. We wanted our speakers to be very honest with you, to share both ups and downs of their personal paths to flourishing. No one here is a sage or is claiming to be a sage. We are all working toward flourishing just like you are. What we hope to do here is start a conversation with women from all walks of life to explore how Stoicism can help us flourish in our individual ways. Many of you have already seen our conference website, PathsToFlourishing.org, which is really our hub for all things Paths to Flourishing. It's actually our conference program, so we'll be referring to it throughout the day, and we encourage you to check it out as well. In addition to the program, you will find detailed information about our lovely speakers and where to find more of their work. You'll see a little mini bookshop with links to our speakers' publications, and we will also be uploading supplemental materials from various talks, such as handouts or worksheets from the speakers. So do keep checking the website way beyond today. PathsToFlourishing.org also features beautiful stories that many of our speakers and some of you here today spoke to us about and wrote up. We asked everyone whose life has been influenced by Stoicism to share their story with the hashtag PathsToFlourishing, and the results, well, they're truly inspiring. If you were here earlier, we shared some of them in our welcome video, and you can see them on the Paths to Flourishing website. Just look for the stories tab, and we'll put a link in the chat box right now for you. But there's room for plenty more Paths to Flourishing stories. If you'd like to share your own journey with others, you can fill out the form on the website, and we'll be happy to include yours alongside everyone else's. You'll notice also that this is not just for women. We would love to hear from everyone in the room. Today, you can read Paths to Flourishing stories from Donald Robertson, Sharon LaBelle, and many others. We also want this conference to be a place where we all connect with other Stoics and Stoic curious people. It's not just about sitting and listening to the speakers. The Stoic community is flourishing around the world, both online and in-person meetings. We want you to connect and chat with other attendees. So we've designated some time for Connect and Chat breakout sessions right after the lunch break. So that will be really exciting. We really hope you'll be able to join a room and get to know some of the other attendees who, just like you, are here to help each other and learn more about Stoicism. Finally, if you'd like to share your experience on your socials throughout the day, that would be absolutely fantastic. Please do so using hashtags PathsToFlourishing. And each word is capitalized. Stoicism, hashtag Stoicism, and do tag Modern Stoicism on @StoicWeek.
We do also have some special events taking place after the conference for those who are able to donate at the $50 level or more. As you know, all proceeds from this event go toward the nonprofit Modern Stoicism organization to help share Stoicism around the world. Modern Stoicism's goal is to keep events as accessible to everyone as possible, so tickets are always by donation. However, if you find value in the conference as the day progresses and you'd like to increase your donation amount to $50, you are welcome to do so at any point. We have two special STOA events for the gold level donors. The first one, immediately following the conference at 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. British time, is a fireside chat with our speakers. Most of today's speakers will be available to answer your questions or for you to just get to know them a little more. The second event will take place tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. British time, and is a journaling workshop with Kathryn, our resident Stoic journaling expert. There's such a special opportunity here. Kathryn's workshops are highly sought after and are said to be life-changing. So if you would like at any point to become a gold level donor, just follow the link in the chat box to top up, or head back to the Eventbrite page and email us at hello@PathsToFlourishing.org to request your Zoom link. So just a few more housekeeping items before we get started on our excellent program. First, a reminder that all talks will be recorded and available within a few days after the conference. So no worries if you're not able to attend the talks in real time. All ticket holders will be able to access them as videos later. Some quick Zoom tips as well. Feel free to turn your camera on if you like. It's completely optional, so no pressure, but all participants will be muted at all times except for the breakout sessions. We welcome comments and questions in the chat at any time. If you have a question for a speaker as they're talking, feel free to enter it in chat and we'll present it to the speaker at the end of their talk, time and fate permitting. If you have any tech issues with sound, we find it's best to do a complete restart of your device and then do a speaker test when you log back on. Since the sessions are being recorded, if you do happen to experience any tech issues, please know that you won't miss out on anything. We'll get recordings to you as soon as possible after the event. We are super excited to have you all here today at this historic event. We know this conference is going to launch a whole new era for Stoicism, so thank you for joining us.
So let us get started with our first speaker, everyone. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Ranjini George. Ranjini currently teaches Stoicism, mindfulness, and creative writing at the University of Toronto and is visiting meditation and writing teacher at Tara Mandala Buddhist Retreat Center in Boulder, Colorado, USA. She has published numerous books and recently won first place in Canada's inaugural coffee shop author contest for her travel memoir, Miracle of flowers in the footsteps of an emperor, a goddess, a story, and a tipping stool. Ranjini will be talking about a female Buddha, a Roman emperor, lessons for joyful living. Welcome, Ranjini.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you, Brittany. Wonderful to be here. So I'm going to be talking about a female Buddha and a Roman emperor. So we are in really good company. We are going to begin with a brief meditation session, a brief mindfulness session. In Buddhism, it's traditional to begin every session with intention setting. So I thought that would be great. We do that in journaling too. So just let's begin. It's a quick 1 minute coming into your body. So just come home to your body. And feel your feet on the floor. Your palms can rest on your thighs. Just take a few long, deep breaths. Our human life is extraordinarily precious. And we know that so well in Stoicism, where we begin every morning recognizing what our core values are. And at the end of the day, looking at what we did, whether we did it well, what we left out, what we could have done better. And human effort is extraordinarily useful. Because Marcus Aurelius, in the midst of all his responsibilities, sat with his journal. 1,900 years later, we have his distillation of Stoic wisdom. We have the fruits of his hard work and efforts. So the intention as we begin this conference, this historic conference, that perhaps Marcus and Cleanthes and Zeno imagined would happen one day in the future. Just recognizing our effort in being here, in a gathering where our focus is to develop character and excellence and courage and compassion, where our desire is to be of benefit. It takes courage, it takes vision, and it takes hard work. So applaud yourself for being here today, for your effort and your motivation. And may whatever we do here today be of benefit to all, to ourselves and to others. In Buddhism, every practice session, as it does in Stoicism in a different way, begins with this heartfelt aspiration of bodhicitta, that recognizing our own precious human life, we develop the intention to use our life usefully for all sentient beings, even for the animals of the earth, the insects, the birds. We generate the heartfelt intention to make good use of our precious human life. So Stoicism perhaps began with Socrates and Pythagoras studying from the Pythias. I was reading one of Donald's tweets yesterday in Delphi. It perhaps began with the manifestation of these women. And though you often see in Buddhism, you see Siddhartha, you see the historical Buddha in a male form. In Buddhism, the mother of all Buddhas is Prajnaparamita, Tara, the female form. In Buddhism, the feminine principle is associated with Sophia, wisdom. And the masculine principle is associated with compassion. And we all have both principles within us. I think one of the reasons that so many of us resonate with Marcus Aurelius so much is because within him, we have that balance of the male and female principles. Marcus, one of the most powerful men in his time, leading all these people to 12 legions, to war, civil war, the Marcomannic Wars. He's also vulnerable and human. And some called him scornfully a dove, unlike Avidius Cassius, who was called a hawk. Marcus had the courage to not fit into this masculine stereotypes of his day, but to actually be that dove. And to know that being that dove does not make you weak. That within us, we must have that balance. And that same thing goes for the female Buddha. She can be fierce and she can be gentle. But even when she is fierce, and she is fierce only when skillful means don't work, when gentle persuasion doesn't work, she acts with the heart of compassion. So I'm going to go bring up my PowerPoint. And here we see, okay. Not sure why it's not going into slide sharing. There we are. Sorry. Well, right at the beginning, we have Marcus Aurelius and we have Tara. And Tara, as you can see, she's beautiful. She has 7 eyes on the palms of her hand and on her feet. And part of that is because this is a symbol of her all-seeing compassion. So I want to talk about today how I came into Stoicism, and I want to tell you the story of Tara, her 21 faces. I want to touch on the faces of Marcus Aurelius, and then a little bit on the wish-fulfilling jewel, which is the mind in Buddhism. So I came into Stoicism through a bust. I got this gift of a bust in Dubai, and I didn't know who the name was. And then I figured out one day, many years later, on a visit to the ancient Agora, that the bust was the bust of Antoninus Pius, the adoptive father of Marcus Aurelius. And then when I read Donald's book many years later, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, I was struck by the fact at how much in Stoicism was what I had studied in Buddhism. I had been a student, I am a student of Buddhism and also a Buddhist teacher. And I was struck by the similarities between both traditions. So the story of Tara is seen as a historical person. The story goes that once there was a woman named Yeshe Dawa, Wisdom Moon. She lived in a time long ago when people believed that in order to be enlightened, one had to have a man's body. So the belief was that you had to have a masculine body, a male body, to be enlightened. Wisdom Moon was so developed in her understanding and compassion. Her wisdom, her patience, her concentration, and her generosity, that people came from all over the kingdom to see her counsel. Crowds sat at her gate. And what I'm struck by in the story of Tara is that she was doing something that women did not normally do. She was teaching. And crowds came to see her. And the men in that time were not used to receiving wisdom from a female form. The crowds gathered around her and they told her, Wisdom Moon, you are so close to being enlightened. You must pray to be magically transformed into a man. Wisdom Moon was quiet for a moment. She knew that the monks and the holy men meant well, but that their vision was limited, that the vision of these men were limited. Finally, she addressed them. Nowhere can I find what is male, and nowhere can I find what is female, because in the absolute realm, there is no difference between male and female. But in the relative realm, women in the female form have suffered because of patriarchy. And Wisdom Moon says they are simply forms, no more separate from one another than a wave is from water. But since most Buddhas have chosen to come as a man, I vow for all time, until all suffering is ended, I will become enlightened only in a female body. So this is the vow of Tara. Tara says that she will achieve enlightenment only in the female body. So you can see her as a feminist. In Stoicism, we use maxims. And in Buddhism, the way we connect to Tara is through her mantra, which is a vibration of sound, which is Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re So Ha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re So Ha. So Tara has different forms. She has 21 forms, and in the temple where I teach in Colorado, you see all 21 of her forms. Some forms are wrathful, some forms are gentle, and some are really fierce. And when I was going through a difficult time in my life, where I valued compassion and gentleness and kindness, but I found it really hard to take fierce action that was good for me, because compassion begins with self-compassion. So we are not talking about idiot compassion. I meditated on the fierce form of Tara. It was infinitely reassuring for me to see that in this female body, I could be fierce. And so the fierce forms of Tara, that is fierce, but with a heart of compassion. And I see, when I consider Marcus Aurelius, I think of all the different roles that he played as emperor, as a man who sat by his desk, and the image that I have, a coffee mug with riding on a horse, his hand raised, but a man sitting at his desk and writing. So there are these different roles that we play. One of the things that really drew me to Stoicism from the Buddhist tradition is obviously the present moment awareness. In Buddhism, there is great emphasis on lojong, which is mind training. Marcus Aurelius says, each of us lives only in the present, this fleeting moment of time, and the rest of one's life has either already been lived or lies in an unknowable future. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, says, the past is dead, the future is not yet born. So the only country is the country of the present moment. I was struck by Epictetus, his focus on attention, prosoke, the Greek word, of course, which still, we see signs of that in Athens. And Marcus Aurelius's emphasis that our mind has to be this inner citadel. In Buddhism, as in Stoicism, when we say, may I be free of passion, we don't mean love and friendship and warmth. We mean, may I be free of unhealthy passions, which is craving and addictive craving and jealousy and attachment, which is sticky. So the Dalai Lama, who is Tenzin Gyatso, he's the 14th Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet. He says to foster inner awareness, introspection, and reasoning are more efficient than prayer and meditation. He says, take your mind and your body as a laboratory. Engage in some thorough research on your own mental functioning and examine the possibility of making some positive changes within yourself. For training the mind in Buddhism, as in Stoicism, we use datas. We say things like present moment, wonderful moment. Happiness is here and now, so that we are not in this constant state of striving and never, never arriving. The sense of I am home, I have arrived. So this picture is when I traveled to Vietnam, where my Zen teacher, and went to his root temple in Vietnam, Hue. And the Dalai Lama says that fundamentally all spiritual traditions, so whether it's philosophy, Buddhism is often seen as a philosophy, perform the same function, which is to help us tame our mental states, overcome our negativities. So the idea in Buddhism, and if you visit one of the museums when they are open post-COVID, in the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, where I live, you'll see these Buddhist statues carrying a jewel. And the jewel is the jewel of our enlightened mind, our beautiful mind. Sri Sri Ravi Shankar in the Hindu tradition says, protect your mind at all costs. You know, we talk in Buddhism of the mind like the sun, which is covered by clouds, the clouds of our own neurosis and our own habitual patterns. And so through practice, through the daily practice of reminding ourselves of our core values, of looking at ourselves at the end of the day, we train our mind, we work with our emotions. So the emphasis is on practicing. And the emphasis is on, as in Stoicism, is that your mind has this infinite potential to be trained. That your human life and your effort is extraordinarily important and useful. Whether we believe in another life or not is immaterial. The fact is we are here now. And we benefit because of the work of people like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, and the work of each other right now. So I was drawn to Buddhism, Stoicism through Buddhism because of the way it helped me deal with my own afflictive emotions. I am no enlightened sage. I'm very much in progress, but I have the daily aspiration and I work on it. The Dalai Lama, he says, when we forgive, we take back control of our own fate and our feeling. We become our own liberator. So we are not looking for liberation from a source outside ourselves, but we realize that we ourselves have that potential. He says self-defeating attitudes arise not out of their own accord, but out of ignorance, that other people's unskillful behaviors arise out of ignorance. And that's what Marcus reminds himself of every morning too, right? And he says, do away with the judgment and the notion, I have been harmed. You know, dear Marcus, you know, there are times that I'm struggling with unforgiveness and I open up the meditations and there it is, you know, do away with the judgment and the notion I have been harmed. And as soon as you do away with that notion, it drops. The harm itself is gone. The best way to avenge yourself is not to become as they are, so that we have the power to be who we want to be. We have the power to live the life we want to be. We have the power to have the character we want to be. And this is what is so liberating and empowering in these traditions. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, he says, when the force of circumstances causes you in some sense to lose your equilibrium, return to yourself with all speed, for you will be more in control of the measure if you return to it again and again. So the focus is on practice. Practice. Just as we brush our teeth every day, as we shower. And if we don't do that, we can't say, I brushed my teeth last week and today, you know, I don't have to brush it for the next week. But that our mind and our emotions needs this daily practice, whether it's through mindfulness, whether it's through journaling and reading philosophical texts, but that it's through practice that we get better. In Buddhism, that we say that if you practice anger, you will get better at anger. If you practice compassion and kindness and clear-sightedness, you will get better at that. So the other thing that struck me in both Buddhism and Stoicism is this view on interbeing. When we said the opening intention, the idea was that we are all interconnected. That when we work for ourselves, we work for all sentient beings. That our efforts help not just us, but others. And the view from above meditation is one that I love. And I listened to that recording, which Donald has done very often. It's this idea of getting out of this claustrophobia of your own grief and your own self-interest, but moving beyond that to this larger view, so that even though you may not be free from suffering, it gets diffused. It's put into perspective that all sentient beings suffer. And Thich Nhat Hanh coins the word interbeing. He says when we look at the lack of cooperation in society today, it stems from ignorance. Amma, who's a hugging saint in India, she says that, you know, the top floor is burning. And we sit on the ground floor and we think, oh, that doesn't matter to me. It's only the top floor that's burning, but our house is on fire. So this focus that we are all interconnected is important. So in Buddhism, we have this focus on bodhicitta, aspiration. Mindfulness practice is one tiny, the way it's taught is one tiny understanding of what Buddhism practice of meditation is, because in Buddhism, there is this open space. There is this view from above. There is this extending of our view. So focus on present moment awareness is just one little aspect of meditation practice. There are practices such as metta, loving kindness. You know, it's fine and well to say, forgive others, don't be angry, you know, have loving kindness towards all beings. How do you do that? You do that through training and through practice. So, you know, Marcus, I mean, we learn how to deal with anger through all the different strategies. You know, when I'm angry, I tell myself, drop the notion you have been harmed. So I'm using something to work with that anger. So there's practices like metta, which is on the handout that, you know, you can download from the website, where you actually train your mind to wish well to all, even those who you perceive may have harmed you. And of course, Marcus Aurelius, who we love, said in the morning of every day, he says, nor can I be angry with my kinsmen nor hate them, for we have come into being for cooperation, which is why fellowship is so important in these traditions. We can't go on it alone. We learn from the hard work and the efforts of each other.
Ranjini, that's 4 minutes, 4 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to skip working. So we just basically, we work hard. And I want to end with a final meditation. And the final meditation, I just want to bring to mind the story of Hypatia. I know that she is not she's a Neoplatonist, but her story really struck me because among all the philosophers, Hypatia was the one who had this most gory and brutal death. That, you know, here was this woman who taught philosophy, and she did it alone. She, in a world, and this is taken from Edward J. Watts, in a world before feminism, she did it alone. She was not trying to advance the movement or to create opportunities. She pushed past the limits of what other female philosophers had done. So I want to sort of, Hypatia, for those of you who don't know, had this terrible death where she was probably dragged from her carriage, and her skin was torn and wounded with these pottery shards or ceramic tiles. Her eyes were gouged out. She was stripped naked. And so for me as a woman, to imagine this woman dressed in coarse white robes, a philosopher devoted to wisdom, hounded by this faceless mob, and not just killed and strangled, but actually violated, was something that resonated really profoundly with me because it spoke of Hypatia's courage. So I'm just going to end with a short meditation of a minute. So just bringing to mind, feeling your feet on the floor, coming home to your breath, and asking yourself, what kind of life do you want to live? Bringing to mind the courage of a woman philosopher like Hypatia, who at a time of fundamentalism and political rivalry was brutally murdered. So just connecting to your own courage. All of us here, whether this is our first visit, we have come to philosophy because there is something in us that loves philosophy. And when we lack courage, bring to mind philosophers like Hypatia, who had the courage to teach and speak and walk their path. So thank you.
Thank you, Ranjini. Wow, what a fantastic start to our conference. I imagine many of you would like to sit and meditate on Ranjini's session for a while, but we have lots more inspiration on the way. Next is a talk by Eve Riches, who is a mentor, teacher, and employment consultant working across psychology, Stoicism, life coaching, and disability employment support. She runs a monthly Stoic online learning group and a research project as part of Modern Stoicism, where she is on the steering committee. Eve is an advisor to the Aurelius Foundation, where she'll be teaching an online course in Stoicism from the autumn of 2021. Eve will be discussing what Stoicism can teach us about caring for others while caring for ourselves. Welcome, Eve.
Hello, thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you to Ranjini. That was beautiful, wasn't it? I don't know how to follow that. But yeah, it has made me feel better about the fact that after that bit that she did at the end about courage, because my internet has been all over the shop and I'm now working off my mobile. So just letting you know that. So hopefully it will stay with us through my talk. I'm so pleased to be here and able to talk with you all today. In the chat, the thing I would like to hear about would be, if you don't mind sharing, would be, what do you think the challenges are for carers generally and at this time? So during the pandemic, what do you think have been the challenges for carers? And I think someone's going to help me be able to read what's going on in the chat, because unfortunately I won't be able to see it while I'm talking. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing about that. So yeah, anything you think has been particularly difficult recently.
Eve, just a quick interruption. How would you like us to share that? Would you like us to wait till the end of your talk?
Well, hopefully, yeah, hopefully, because I've got half an hour, haven't I? So yeah, hopefully I should have some time at the end and we can take a look at those. Yeah, that would be lovely. Thank you. So the thing that I wanted to talk to you about today was about Stoicism and caring more generally, and then how Stoicism can help us to care for ourselves while we're caring for other people. So I thought I'd start with the circles of care, or you sometimes hear them being talked about as the circles of concern, which I think sounds a bit grim. I think I stole this off Brittany, actually, calling them the circles of care. I much prefer it. It sounds friendlier, doesn't it? And I wanted to put those out there because I don't know if any of you have had the experience of, you know, when you say you're into Stoicism and then someone gives you a funny look and they're like, oh yeah, it sounds great, but I really like caring for other people and I couldn't be so heartless, you know, and you're like, yeah, that's not what it's about. And I think it is that thing we've all come across of people muddling up Stoicism with a small s with Stoicism with a big S. So what are these circles of care about? So you've got yourself in the middle, and then you've got each of the circles of people that you would care for going right out these days because of like Kai Whiting added this one in, right up to all of nature. And the idea behind it is that we draw these circles toward us. So if I give you an example, I was just visiting with my lovely sister last week, and I was thinking about the work that she did during the pandemic, where she was volunteering with elderly people in her community and doing their shopping and taking them to medical appointments while they were isolating. And I was thinking how uncomplainingly she did that, even though some of them, they weren't at all grateful for her work, not even a tiny bit. They were quite moany about it at times. But because she was treating them as if they were her family, and so she's treating these elderly people as if they're her parents or her grandparents, she's acting toward her community in this case as if they were family members. So that's part of what it is to be a Stoic, is being able to bring these circles closer toward us. And this is in our nature, this idea that we are part of the greater whole and that we are interdependent. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this lovely quote from Seneca, and it reminds me of the one that Ranjini brought up in her talk about the, from meditations, we're born to work together like, two hands, 2 feet, the upper and lower rows of teeth. This idea that it is our nature to be compassionate toward others and to be interdependent with others. And that's an interesting thing, because it means that we might be so driven to care for others that we could be at risk of not taking good care of ourselves, so it's not, I don't know, you might think the task is going to be to get people to care for others, but that's not necessarily it at all. It might be more about making sure that we don't get burnt out when we are doing what is natural, which is to reach out to care for other people. And so Stoicism has got some interesting ideas, some very useful ideas that might help us to deal with these things and to make sure we do take good care of ourselves. So here's that word that you might come across sometimes, oikeiosis, which, if you haven't come across it, is often defined as meaning appropriation and thinking about what belongs to us. I'm going to talk about it in the context of caring. And as you can see, it's got these 2 strands. It's got self-care, which comes from our genes, that it's natural to us to want to have self-preservation, but that gradually we learn to select what's right for us and to move toward acting in accordance with the virtues. But on the other side, you've got that it's also natural for us to care for others. So, for example, to care for our offspring, that's in our nature, that's in our genes. But like we were just saying, that you would then learn to extend that care to, well, the whole of nature, going back to the circles of care. And so these 2 strands are both equally important, because part of caring for ourselves is building our relationships with others. But also we can't care for others if we don't care for ourselves well. It's not going to be sustainable. So we have to think of that whole put your own oxygen mask on first, which I'm sure you might have come across that somewhere, that it's no good having that culture of presenteeism and burnout and not setting aside time for your own self-care, like exercising or taking some time out to be in nature. Because even if your primary drive was to care for others, you're not going to be able to do that in the long term if you're not looking after yourself. And I think this has been a particular problem during the pandemic with a lot of the clients that I've worked with. They've ended up having to do so much looking after others, like, women that have been working full time and then somehow shouldering by far the lion's share of teaching children when they were off school, things like that, where people have ended up completely exhausted. And so we really need to think about how can we take good care of ourselves. Now, part of the way that we can look at that is to kind of zone in on one of the virtues, that of justice, because it's particularly useful, I think, to thinking about ourselves as carers. So it's one of the virtues along with wisdom and temperance and courage. And it can mean doing the right thing in terms of being kind, but in terms of fairness as well. So it's very bound up with caring. But people often take it as like, oh, I've either got to care for others or care for myself, as if there's like the either or, but actually that wouldn't be taking the long view. If we think about the wise way of caring, then we would have to make sure that we do it with temperance. Cicero has a lot of really interesting things. I think he gets like, not by everyone, he sometimes gets overlooked a bit, but if you read On Duties, he has a really good bit where he's talking about don't let your generosity exceed your means. And, you know, that you've got to think about how you can care for others whilst also taking care of your responsibility towards yourself or towards your family. So he was obviously very aware of that. We have to think about our personal circumstances. And in my career working in healthcare and education, I've seen so many cases of people being kind of sacrificed on the altar of doing things for others, as if that's just what happens. But actually, that's not very wise if we go back to one of the other virtues for our society. What is the point of these countless burnt out healthcare workers having to leave the profession? Or I read the other day that a third of teachers in the UK in some recent poll were saying they wanted to leave. You know, it doesn't make any sense, does it? And so it can take a lot of courage to push back against this and to be the person that says, well, actually 7 o'clock is my family time and I'm not going to be there for that meeting. You know, I don't think that's a good time to meet. It's very difficult to do that. And so we really need to think about how we can avoid burnout. And so Stoicism has got a few different ways that it can help us. One of which you've probably come across before, which is the idea of the Stoic archer. I use that a lot, where, you know, when you're thinking about trying to do a good job, you often can get your head like focused on the outcomes, which are the things that are outside of your control, and not thinking about the things that are in your control. Like, you know, it's just going to be your beliefs, your thoughts, your actions. And so I really have to be hard on myself with this at work, where I'm thinking about, have I done a good job? You know, have I done a good job with the things that were inside my control? And then be aware that however hard I try, then a client could still have, you know, a really difficult thing happen to them. They could become unwell. They could still not get that job. They could even self-harm. And I have to focus on the fact that I am doing everything within my power on my side. And so that can help, I think, with handling the emotions of having responsibilities and caring for others. The whole Stoic theory of emotions, I think, is incredibly helpful, but it's a huge topic. So I think if we were going to talk about the Stoic theory of emotions, we'd have to have like a whole other talk. But just generally, the idea is that the goal of Stoicism is that we see things as they really are, that we have correct beliefs, and that if we have correct beliefs, a side effect of that is that we're going to feel more emotions like joy and fewer of the emotions like fear and anxiety and anger. So, you know, just a touch on that. For example, recognizing that although it would be good for us or the people we care for to have money or to have good health or to have people being nice to them, that actually it's still possible to live a good life without these things. And, you know, that there are so many people that have had good health or lots of money or a good reputation, and then they've still had a really miserable life. So, you know, getting our head around that, focusing on what's really important, living according to virtue, and that that things like money and health aren't absolutely good. That can be really important. I think it's really good for anyone's emotional regulation, and it's definitely something that I work really hard on. Like Ranjini was saying, none of us are the sage. And one of the ways that I work on that is using Seneca's 3 movements. Now, what this is about is the idea that because we're animals, as human animals, we will have our kind of natural emotional reaction to something. So where we you know, where we're shocked by something, we might have a surge of adrenaline and feel fear in that moment. And that's instinctive and we don't need to worry about it. So we're not like trying to go around being robots and not having any emotions. It's natural to have those first movements. But the second movement is where your beliefs come in. So I was thinking the other day about, I really struggle when people are being aggressive. And unfortunately, I do, like everyone, I do have to deal with that sometimes. And I often have the belief I'm being hurt by this, I'm being actually hurt. And so that's my belief coming in. Someone's been aggressive. Yeah, I've had my animal response to that. That's natural. But I've then got my belief, this is terrible. This is an absolutely bad thing. I am being hurt. And so my judgments aren't actually true. It's not true that I'm being hurt. I'm being hurt by my beliefs about the situation rather than the situation itself. I could choose to think differently. Now, if I don't get my head around that bit, I'll end up with the third movement, which is where you've fully been taken over by the emotion. Now, at this point, you're probably not acting with wisdom because, you know, you're going along with these beliefs that aren't true. You've probably lost all self-control. And so you might not be being kind to yourself or others as well. And we might lack courage, you know, like where I was saying about if someone said you've got to be in this meeting at 7 o'clock and you were too anxious about not having the approval of that person to stand up to them, for example. So sometimes it's about courage as well. So I often talk about it as mind the gap, that the train is coming into the station, and that's the train of the emotion. And then you can choose not to get onto it. So you can observe the train arriving and you can be like, here's my anxiety train, because that's the train that arrives a lot at my particular station. And then I try to say to myself, I see that I'm having beliefs that I am being hurt by this person being aggressive, for example. And then I can try to choose not to get on the train. Now, I'm not saying I never get on the train, because of course I do. And the example I was giving you, the thing about dealing with people who are being aggressive, that's something I still have to work so hard on. You know, every time it happens, I'm in so much danger of getting fully on the train and just sailing away. And so luckily, as I'm about to tell you, that doesn't matter that I'm a bit rubbish with that. This is okay, because we're all on the Stoic journey. So one of the amazing things about the work that I do, and, you know, one of the kind of magical things about it is every stupid thing that I've done or continue to do, or everything that I've struggled with, becomes important as part of the work, as part of sharing in other people's journeys. Because if you think about why, I'm assuming most of you would have at some point read at least part of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. If you think about why that's such a great book, it's because we're watching someone struggling. Like, he's reminding himself over and over about how he messes up and what might be helpful and what's helpful for him. And that's so kind of relatable, isn't it? To hear him talking about his own failings, really. That's the way that I would read it anyway. So although when you're supporting others, obviously you need to try and hold yourself to a high standard, actually being able to share about your vulnerabilities and the things that have helped you is going to be a huge part of the gift that you could have to give to others. And it's going to give people permission to admit the things that they're finding difficult. And without being able to admit those things, they're not going to be able to make any progress. So you're giving them that permission. And so, you know, that's one of the really good things that you can be doing to help people to move towards living their best life. Another one that I thought was a useful practical idea for carers is, what if you're in a situation where you actually can't help someone? So there are situations where you don't have the power to change what someone is going through, but you can still use, for example, the dichotomy of control. You might not want to call it that because it sounds a bit off-putting. I think a lot of the terminology doesn't sound like fun times, but But you can help people to reframe a situation. So I was thinking about when I was in my 20s and a doctor had to give me some bad news about a disease and that I had it and that it wasn't treatable or curable. And he was so careful to use the dichotomy of control. And so although he wasn't able to say, oh, and I'm going to fix this for you, he was able to say, what's still in your control is how you respond to this. And he really spelled it out. And he said, you have these choices, you have these options about like, how are you going to get around? Where are you going to live? And you can start, you can start to think about how you're going to respond to this situation. Yeah, you don't have any sort of agency in terms of the disease itself. But what you do have is all these different choices about how you're going to understand and respond to this news. And that was such a gift, and it really showed me that when you're supporting someone, you don't have to be able to fix things for them. And that might not even help anyway. You could be helping people to see things as they really are and to see what is still under their control. So that's a very powerful thing that he did there. I've been so grateful for that because I think it set me off on a journey of looking at things in a certain way. Now, I've been kind of talking about almost like I was talking to people who are in a caring role already. But actually, I think anyone can contribute. I don't think you have to volunteer or be in an official caring role in order to be contributing to the greater good. Like when you think about it, you can have an interaction with someone. I used to work in a supermarket and like you could see that your behavior could make someone either have a brilliant day or the absolute opposite. So I'm not saying everyone needs to go off and volunteer if you're not officially a carer, but I do think there are lots of benefits from volunteering. I've been doing it since I was 7 and I'm really passionate about volunteering. I've had so many adventures. It does relate to Stoicism because it is trying to be part of contributing to the greater good. So it is part of acting with virtue, which means a side effect of it is you get to have loads of joy from what you're doing, even though that isn't the goal. But also it can mean that you're connecting with your community, like what I was saying about what my lovely sister was doing during the pandemic, or connecting with nature. I once spent a really hot afternoon building like a home for otters with a load of strangers, and it was the most joyful thing. So you can have some amazing adventures. In terms of self-care, you do need to set a budget and think about how much you can afford to give. Because you might need to give something else up first, or like watch less television or something. It might be that your personal circumstances are that you shouldn't volunteer right now. And make sure that you stick to that, because it's no good just adding to everything that you've got to try and fit into your week when you're already overstretched. In terms of how to volunteer, at the end, I'm going to tell you about a resource that's got some ideas about that, but there are loads of really good resources online now. And you can even volunteer fully online, which is a fantastic thing that's increased during the pandemic. And I wanted to share a little story about a bit of volunteering that I did, because I think it very much relates to seeing things clearly. I was practicing what I was going to say in the talk, and I was saying this I was telling my daughter about this, and every time I go to tell this story, I end up crying. So I'm sorry about that. I'm going to try and get through it. Where I think volunteering can really help to achieve, like Ranjini was talking about, the view from above. It exactly fits with what she was talking about. That it can help you to see things more clearly and go outside of your worldview. So when I got to the point that I needed a mobility aid, I was given free training from Guide Dogs UK with a long cane, and I had this long cane. But I had this idea that people were going to think weird things about me if I had a long cane, and I just didn't want to do it. And I was very upset about it. I was very, very resistant. And then around this time, I was volunteering in a country where almost all blind people had no mobility aids whatsoever, not even a cane. And I was giving a talk to these teenagers, and they were, when they came into the room, they were being led by a nurse, and then they all had like one hand on the shoulder of the person in front of them, like a daisy chain, which didn't seem like there was enough dignity there for people who were like 18, 19. And they listened to the talk. And then at the end of the talk, everyone left, but one of the girls got left behind because this young woman, her shoe had fallen off. And so she was like feeling around, she got her shoe back on. And then the thing that amazed me was that when she went to leave, she just immediately dropped down onto her hands and feet and felt the floor, and then used her hands on the floor to find the door and to leave the room. And this was obviously something she was really used to doing, moving around on her hands and feet. And I was just absolutely astonished at this. By the way, I've still got some central visions how I saw all this play out. And I just thought, oh my God, I am such an idiot in terms of the way I'm seeing things. Like, I'm just not seeing things as they really are. I am lucky to have a long cane. I'm not burdened by that. It doesn't matter what people think about me when they see me come in the room with a cane or leave my house with a cane. It doesn't matter. What matters is about being connected to my community and, you know, living my best life. It's not, you know, and being able to take care of myself. So I think I got through it without crying. I still feel quite emotional about it now, though, because I think having these opportunities to connect with a completely different world like that can be so important for us stepping outside of our little life and kind of our perhaps narrow way that we're seeing the world. It really shows you what's important, I think.
Eve, that's 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
Okay. So we've been talking about how caring for others is an important part of Stoicism, and that we need to do that with good self-care. And so my suggestions for good self-care for today are making sure that you read this new book that's come out by Kai and Leo have written a really fantastic book that has got a lot of inspiration in it and a lot of hopefulness, which I feel like we all need right now. And finally, Brittany and I have been working on a resource for carers that you can find at stoicare.com. Brittany's done all this amazing work on all the kind of theory behind Stoicism and caring, and she's written an amazing toolkit for parents. I've been working on one for teachers that should be uploaded soon because we're still putting resources on there. And there's some meditations, and you know where I was saying there's the resources about volunteering, and I wrote a blog about volunteering, and we're continuing to develop that resource. So please do go and take a look at it, get in touch, give us your suggestions, all those kind of things. We'll really, you know, look forward to hearing from you. So yeah, there we go. Stop sharing.
Eve, we did get quite a few comments in the chat box when you asked about the kind of difficulties that we might experience. And so, yeah, burnout came up quite a number of times. The idea of filling your own bucket so we don't run out of love and care to give. The idea of being isolated. Dina Mills and Tim sort of mentioned isolation, not being able to lean on others. Scott Perry mentioned embracing uncertainty and navigating adversity together. You're probably not going to have too much time to respond, but yeah, being one person handling the plates of multiple people, said Heather. Yeah. Did you want to jump in?
I really hope, I mean, Brittany, I've got we've got a lot of ideas of how Stoic-Care can hopefully become somewhat of a community as well, to share ideas and to support each other in the work that we do. So I really hope that people will kind of watch this space, because I'm not saying we can fix these problems, but I feel this movement of people working within the caring professions and within volunteering who are interested in Stoicism. I just seem to be connecting with all these amazing people. It's such a privilege to be working with these people. But yeah, I'm hoping that we can continue to build these bonds within our communities and support each other with the work that we're doing.
That's great. Thank you so much, Eve. Thank you so much, everyone. Really love that. I can see from the comments in the chat box. Next up, everybody, we have our first panel, Power to Care. The title for this panel was inspired by Sharon Labelle's talk at Stoicon last year, where she described women's superpower as the power to care. Dr. Brittany Polat will be moderating with panelists Leah Goldrick and Dr. Jennifer Baker, who are getting ready in the background, and they'll be discussing how Stoicism can help us flourish in the caring roles that women are so often called on to perform. Brittany is the author of the book Tranquility Parenting, a guide to staying mindful and engaged. She holds a PhD in applied linguistics and writes about Stoic psychology and inner excellence at her website, Living in Agreement. She is co-creator with Eve Richards of the brand new website, stoicare.com, which you just heard mentioned. Leah Goldrick is a freelance writer, editor, and children's librarian. She holds bachelor's degrees in philosophy and history, as well as a master's in library and information science from Rutgers University. Her website is Common Sense Ethics, and she has a YouTube channel of the same name. She's co-editor of the forthcoming Stoicism Today's Selected Writings, Volume 3. And Leah is co-founder with Brittany of the Stoic Parents Facebook group. Finally, Dr. Jennifer Baker teaches Stoic ethics at the College of Charleston and writes on how to apply Stoicism to contemporary ethical issues in life and in fields like economics. She's the author of over 24 articles in philosophy and co-editor of Economics and the Virtues for Oxford University Press. She is working on a book manuscript on economics and moral indifference. I'll turn it over to Brittany for more power to care, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kathryn, and thank you, Eve, for that great introduction to Stoicism and care. We will be continuing in that vein by focusing specifically on what Stoicism tells us about caring for others in a family environment. So we'll talk about parenting, but we'll also talk about some different kinds of caring relationships at the end, time permitting. So ancient Stoics like Epictetus said that Stoicism can help us understand our duties and responsibilities toward others. So I'd like to start out with a question for Jennifer Baker. Welcome, Jennifer. How can we in the 21st century use Stoic ideas to understand our role as parents or caregivers of any type?
Well, I think we can use the philosophy to help us understand the role by thinking of parenting as being a role, like a role that will fit you or won't, and as one that involves certain duties. And this is kind of common sense, even though the idea of duty has fallen out of favor. But my example is always, when the baby's crying and you just fell asleep 4 minutes ago, something pulls you to the baby, and it's not thoughts about yourself or thoughts about flourishing, self-interest, or any kind of calculation about what's best in the world. And Epictetus and Cicero both talked a bit about the way roles help give us content in our ethical behavior. Brian Johnson has a book a few years old that kind of interprets Epictetus's account. But it's really helpful, I think, because it suggests that we aren't always trying to figure out what it's best to do. We are always within a certain role acting as well as we can. There can be conflicts between roles, and then two helpful warnings. I'll stop after this. For a Stoic, you could never just accept society's consideration of your role. There's no way it will be accurate. So you may be a daughter, but you can't just inherit what society thinks a daughter should do. You have to revise it from the inside, focused on, what's ethical. And then a second thing about Stoicism and roles is that you always have, Brian Johnson interprets it as a private role, but I think of it, your integrity. So there will always be ways to opt out of the obligations you have because of your role.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I like how you mentioned kind of you're constantly revising your role, because this is something that Stoicism tells us is we're always applying our own wisdom to every situation, right? It's not as if there are rules that we have to follow. It's kind of like we are using our own rationality, our own intellectual capacity, and saying, how can I apply this specifically to my life? Maybe what I'm doing doesn't apply exactly to what someone else is doing. Maybe what they're doing doesn't apply to me. So it's constantly, like you said, kind of revising and making it fit the circumstances of our lives. I really like that flexibility in Stoicism. Yeah, thank you. So let's talk more about parenting as a Stoic. So Leah, welcome.
Hi.
Why do parents today need Stoicism, and what does Stoicism offer that parents aren't getting elsewhere?
I think that Stoicism really offers parents a way to make our lives happier and more meaningful. Because it's a philosophy that tells us that happiness and meaning are the result of being a virtuous person, right? Rather than the result of only external achievements or gratification. And Stoic philosophy also helps us specifically tackle the job of parenting, which really can be very difficult sometimes, with a better attitude. It helps us to remember that even with whatever it is we're facing, being of service to others is in and of itself a virtue, and that is sufficient for happiness.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you. And I know you also have lots of experience caring for little ones right now. So I can vouch for the fact that this was especially useful during the pandemic. Care of those little ones.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thank you. So as Stoics, we often do talk about virtue. Jennifer, for you, what does it mean to actually be a Stoic parent? And how does this differ from being a non-Stoic parent, for example?
Well, I love this question because, part of what makes you like Stoicism is seeing so many philosophical mistakes being promoted. And I'm so grateful for you guys, both of your efforts, because I just see such a dearth of philosophy on parenting, with so much discussion, so much worry, but so little philosophy. And I just have a few examples of how bad it is out there. And one is that you'll hear people unashamed to voice the idea that their children are in competition with other children, and that, they hope they succeed and dominate. Okay, that seems like a pretty poor life philosophy to me. And some people think that's good parenting. And then you'll also hear this. There was a Mother's Day essay in the New York Times on how only mothering generates the kind of true love you can experience as a human. And so there are, and maybe religious views overlap with this, but the idea that the point of life is just love, which, nothing objectionable in that, but it seems like there's more guidance we could get. You love your babies and then you have 18 more years of raising them. And so I see the Stoics as just kind of adding, if those explanations seem very deep, they also seem shallow in terms of guidance. And then there are also a lot of suggestions that you just want your children to be happy. So people will say that maybe if they give up on the competition between children being what we're setting up here. And then if people don't, and we know people don't have a good sense of what happiness is, I feel like that can be a very empty goal. Do you mean that they'll feel cheerful all the time? Does that mean they need a different personality? Is there a particular job you have in mind that'll keep them at peace? So for me, Stoicism is so guiding because it's going to suggest the parent has to really think hard about their role as a parent, change the way they think of themselves so that they can accommodate it, which gets rid of a lot of tensions between what you could do and what you do as a responsible parent. And then it also is going to really emphasize a harmony in your role and with your children. So I always think this seems very countercultural. If you're a Stoic parent, you'll know you're doing okay. And that sounds very arrogant. Like, I think we're supposed to not know and be hoping everything works out. But because you're just going for harmony and you're not hoping they're first in the race, or not hoping that they're happy when they're 40, and nothing hinges on these future outcomes. If things are going okay, then you've hit a mark.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I like what you said about the lack of philosophy in parenting out there, because that's one thing I noticed when I actually became a parent. So I found Stoicism after I became a parent. It's kind of what drove me to Stoicism in the first place after I had my third child. And, you read a lot of parenting books, or at least I did. I think a lot of people do. And they're always talking about a parenting philosophy. And what I realized after I found Stoicism is that your life philosophy should come first, right? Why would you have a parenting philosophy if you don't have a general philosophy about life, right? Because then your parenting philosophy isn't really anchored into anything. So what I love about Stoicism, this practical life philosophy, is that not only is it your life philosophy for everything, for the way you're living your life, but also it's your parenting philosophy too. It's all in one, right? So your parenting philosophy should connect directly into what you believe to be most valuable in life, and the meaning of your life. And so I just love how Stoicism puts it all together in this way for us. So yes, thank you. Okay, so Leah, let's move on to focusing a little bit more on virtue, which is usually described as wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control in the Stoic context. So how do we apply virtue in our lives as parents? And on a related note, what do we do when we fail to apply virtue, which happens to the best of us? How do we recover and keep going?
Well, I would say probably the most fundamental way that Stoic philosophy can help us apply virtue in our lives as parents is by reminding us that challenges are actually opportunities for growth, right? So when we look at things this way, we have the wisdom to apply the necessary virtue to whatever our situation happens to be at the moment. And for the times when we fail to apply virtue, we should remember that, we aren't born Stoic philosophers. There's a really great passage to remember just for this situation. And it's that Epictetus is not superior to Socrates, but if he is not inferior, that is enough for me. And so what Epictetus is saying here is that Socrates and people like him are the exception rather than the rule. So you don't need to be a Socrates or someone exceptionally virtuous as long as you are making progress towards virtue as a person and as a parent.
Thank you. Yeah, that helps to keep that in mind. And I just wanted to mention also for our audience that Leah had a special challenge this past month. She just moved into a new house with her kids, and she was painting and putting everything together, and she was able to do the conference, and she's here today after just having moved. So that in itself is a very Stoic way to be, right? So thank you for that, Leah.
Yeah, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So Jennifer, let's talk about teaching our children now. We know we want to practice excellence ourselves, but we also want to help our children live good lives and become good people, if possible. So you kind of touched on this earlier, but can you talk a little bit more about how we could approach teaching Stoic virtue to our children?
Yeah, and happily there's some psychological research on how to do this, and it overlaps with Stoic advice. I guess my own little notes on it that I keep track of is that I really want to check to make sure my children will do the right thing at cost, without my prompting them to. I want them to be a little rebellious against social norms that aren't fair or that are harmful. Like I want them to display, age appropriate bravery, but I would get worried if they conform too much. I want them to seem happy in a Stoic sense. So I don't want them, tangled up with some of the worries about fitting in that maybe seem typical to us in our culture. I'm not sure they are in all other cultures, but I want them to have a really good Stoic self-conception. And I want them to care about common humanity and to be my goal for them would be the kind of people who can help easily, like no big obstacles to just immediately helping someone. And that replaces some of the goals that I think are very stressful, for the parents and child competitions. And you can see these things progress, it's not as if they have to happen right away. Back and forth is fine, but it's gratifying to kind of have a checklist like that and to see them make progress.
Right. And your children are a little bit older. Are they teenagers right now?
Oh, one's just graduated from high school, and then 13's my youngest. And I got one in the middle.
Oh, nice. So you can kind of see how it's kind of paying off as the years go by.
Yes. And, some of the advice from psychology about how important it is to let children speak back to you. I know, we don't always like that in our culture. We might want them to be, especially down here, there's a lot of yes sir, no sir, kind of compliance from children. But that I always think is very Stoic, because the parent and the child, they're on the same page. The goal is for everyone to do the right thing. And so I always think of that parenting is very participatory if you allow that to be the goal. The children understand that's the goal, and you are willing to get corrected sometimes by what they're good at pointing out.
Setting that example, right, of taking constructive criticism.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. So Leah, one of the themes in your work on philosophical parenting is creating your own family culture. You and I have talked about that before. You've written about this on your blog. Could you tell us about what family culture is and why it's important? And for example, how can a parent living in the middle of a very materialistic and egocentric society establish a philosophical family culture?
Right. So a family culture would include things like shared values, habits, and traditions. And family culture is important because, well, first of all, there's research showing that it's really influential for children, the family culture within which they grow up. And second, because family culture acts as a counterbalance to whatever the dominant culture is. So Jennifer was sort of touching on that. And so if the dominant culture is very much about sort of egocentrism, having a different type of family culture would act as a check for that. And so there are a lot of ways to create a Stoic family culture. But since we have limited time today, I would just say that some of the things that you can do are to create daily habits and family traditions that are sort of Stoic themed. And this would depend a lot on the age of your children. My son is 6, and he has a virtue chart where he gets a star next to the virtues that he practiced that day. But other things that you could do would be something like having philosophical discussions that promote, values and critical thinking. Things like gardening together, appreciation of nature, and so on. Really the only limit on something like this is how creative you could be with it.
Wow, I love that, a virtue chart instead of like a chore chart or the other things that parents make, a virtue chart. Would you consider making a principle of that for others who might be interested?
Sure.
Leah's very good at making principles on her website, and she also has a Common Sense Mother website as well. I'd also like to give a shout out to Meredith Coons in the audience. Meredith has a great blog, The Stoic Mom, and she was not able to be here for the whole conference today, but definitely go check out her blog as well, and hopefully she'll be available for next year. So turning to our final questions now, moving away a little bit from parenting and to the broader idea of caregiving within the family. So obviously, Stoicism also applies to other family caregiving roles, such as caring for an aging parent or a spouse who is unwell. So Jennifer, do you think Stoicism can help us to care for dependent adults also with patience, dignity, and compassion?
Yes, I'm part of a caretaking group because my husband recently had a double transplant, and we discuss every Saturday the challenges of it all. And there are a bunch of natural Stoics, if you guys are comfortable with that expression, but the caretakers are very, very strong, and they're strong in specific ways. They're choosing this role. You can opt out, right? So it's a fit, the way Epictetus would suggest you find, but they lose out on a lot, so what they lose out on, I think sometimes their behavior is very heroic and spectacular. So these are big losses, but time for themselves, their own projects, their own jobs, doing literally everything for someone else. That's a way to live without, indifference, as we'd put it. And that they manage it is a great example to me, even if they aren't. I feel like Stockdale's advice as a prisoner of war is always applicable to easier life. But, he's like, you don't want to force Stoicism on people when they're doing just fine, so it's not like I'm proselytizing about Stoicism, but I recognize Stoic qualities in these people who are so capable of doing things that, people complain about colds. I see day-long complaints about colds from my friends, and I think of what the caretakers are doing, in particular caretakers of sick children, and it just doesn't compare. So we have heroes among us, and I feel like they're really good sources of information about ethics.
Yes, totally agree. Earlier, Eve was talking about courage as a component of caring, and I completely agree that carers are the unsung heroes, right? Courage is not just about being brave in battle or, making a public stand for something. It's also about just that everyday hard work of showing up and doing something for someone else that you're probably never going to be recognized for. I think this is true courage. So Stoicism applies just extremely well to this situation. So thank you for that thought. Okay, so it is time to wrap up our formal questions, and we will take questions from the audience after this. So Leah, do you have any just concluding thoughts about Stoicism and family relationships you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would just say that this past year plus has been, very difficult for a lot of people. And it may seem kind of overwhelming for some people to try to apply philosophical ideals to their family life right about now. So I would say, just start small. Marcus Aurelius tells us that if we find ourselves disturbed by circumstances, that we should return to ourselves and return to virtue as soon as possible. So I would say that it's never too late to correct course and to make positive changes in your life and your family's life.
Yeah, I love that. Never too late. You can get started today. No matter what's happened in the past, it's really never too late. If your children are grown or if you're taking on a caregiving role later in life, you can always apply Stoicism. So thank you. So everyone out in the audience, if you do have questions for us, we've got about, looks like 7 minutes left. So type them in the chat. I think that's probably going to be the easiest way for me to see them. And we'll try to get to all of them. While I'm waiting for questions, I just wanted to mention again, stoicare.com. This is devoted to all different kinds of caregiving roles. So we do have a toolkit for parents. It's kind of just a quick list of resources, some 3 major topics to keep in mind as you're caring. As Eve mentioned earlier, also teachers. We'd like to expand this maybe to medical professionals, just anyone in a caregiving role. So definitely check that out as well. So Lydia says, any Stoic books for kids? This is the perennial question. It always comes up in Stoic parents. By the way, if you are on Facebook, we have the Stoic parents group, as was mentioned earlier. We'd love for you to join. Lots of discussion there going on. So I don't know, Leah, do you want to mention anything? Leah's a librarian, so she's perfect to answer questions about books.
Well, wasn't there a new series, Brittany, coming out that was specifically Stoic? Because I don't know what that is off the top of my head, but I can give books generally sort of about virtue. What was that? I thought it was something new that came out, like a Stoic kids books.
Well, I think Ryan Holiday had something about a book. I'm not coming up with the title right now, The Boy Who Would Be King.
Okay.
I haven't checked out that one yet. A couple of our members, I think Jason Valenstein published a book. This is for young kids, very, very young kids, and Ben Rout. So I think if you search on Amazon, you could find those. Is there a Stoic caretakers group? not specifically just for general caretaking, although we are trying to, like Eve mentioned, maybe establish a community through stoicare.com. So if you're interested in that, please get involved. Email us, subscribe to the mailing list, whatever, just so we have feedback. We know who's interested, what you'd like to do. Maybe it's the beginning of something. We really want this conference to kind of catalyze more talk about care and Stoicism. So I'm looking through right now. Kathryn, are there any at the top that I missed? Not seeing any others.
There was a nice question from Corinne, who said, let me just bring it back up. Oh, what was it?
I see one.
Corinne's question was, oh, here it is. I love this. Is it at all possible for us as children to inculcate Stoicism in parenting and introduce it to our parents?
Oh. Well, that's a challenge.
It's really, I try and teach Stoicism to college students, and it's really hard. I mean, it takes a long time, and we have to try again, spend a semester, have a midterm that people get feedback on, have a paper. So if you're willing to put in that time, I'm sure your parents are as good as students as I get. But it's quite a chore.
Yeah, I would say what helps me thinking about sharing Stoicism with others. So if you're like me, you love Stoicism so much, you're out talking about it, you want to share it with the world, but when you do start talking about it, you get lots of funny looks and people are kind of just smile and nod, right? So you have to kind of be careful about it. And I would say within your family, I like to think about the quote from Marcus Aurelius where he says, "Love everyone sincerely. If you can't teach them, then just put up with them," right? So you have this, either teach people Stoicism or teach them, maybe a better way of seeing than they already see, or if you can't, just bear with them patiently. So when it comes to, family relationships, I like to think of it as a parallel relationship with such a spouse or siblings, then you can try to teach them and bear with them patiently. With your children, obviously, your role is to teach them. So you can teach them and, of course, bear with them patiently. When it comes to the generation ahead of you, so you as a child teaching your parents, it's a different relationship. You don't have the same authority. So in some cases, you might just be bearing with them patiently. I think it depends on, how open they are, your relationship with them. There's no one size fits all approach. So sorry, I can't give you some specific steps to follow, but it's kind of, again, about just...
Brittany.
What's
I might
that?
jump in. I think we might have time to have one more question. So
okay.
Dan's got a question for you all. He says, Leah talked of family culture as counterbalance to general culture, for example, consumerism. How can you inspire kids to follow virtue? What goals can be developed? Stoic Dan, that's a really good question, as always. Over to you, ladies.
Leah, you want to take?
Sure, I can start. Well, one way to sort of counteract consumerism could be to have your children donate some of their toys that they're not using, to charity or for kids in need. You could also have them save money, and give it to a charitable cause, something like that. Those are things that I either have tried or want to try when my kids are a little bit older.
Thank you. Jennifer, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was real strict about the home not being a theater. I feel like media is really, really powerful. And people told me my kids would be out of step. I mean, that they wouldn't be able to catch up. I knew that was ridiculous. You really have to resist some of the things you're told with great confidence by people who haven't finished raising children. And it worked out really well for them not to have TV, and they got academic interests. It's really paid off, and they're online now. They're fully online now. So it was completely false that they'd be out of step with others. But I just felt that was too strong a torrent, and that I wouldn't be able to get any messaging in. And I also think people seem really unhappy who are just watching all the time. And in terms of attracting people to Stoicism, if that's what we're interested in, I get ideas all the time from happy families, happy moms, happy dads. I mean, those are the people I want to emulate. They don't have to tell me anything. I see their happiness, I see the harmony, and then you get 18 tips from them. So, I don't feel like there's any need to proselytize if people are attracted to happiness, calmness, tranquility, parenting. I mean, it's just obvious when things are going well as possible. And then I think there are all sorts of tricks, or tactics that'll be associated with being able to identify a family that seems happy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think those are all the questions we have time for today. Jennifer and Leah, thank you so much for being here, sharing your wisdom and parenting knowledge with us. And that's the end of our panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much, ladies. That's definitely given us a lot to think about in terms of expressing our superpower to care in a Stoic way. Next up, we have Lalya Lloyd. Lalya is an Athens and London-based writer and classicist who has worked in publishing and teaching. She first started writing professionally as a book reviewer and is now completing a master's in creative nonfiction at UEA. Lalya is interested in the conversation between ancient and modern civilizations and likes to explore history and places through people and their stories. She will be telling us how teaching made her a better Stoic. Over to you, Lalya.
Well, thank you very much, Kathryn, for that absolutely wonderful introduction. I hope that you can hear me fine and there's no kind of feedback on the line here. Anyway, good morning, everyone, and I'm wishing you a very good evening from Greece here. This talk is called How Stoicism Made Me a Better Teacher. Let me tell you a story. Classicists, like me, love stories. That's because our subject area, the languages, literature, and culture of the ancient Greeks and Romans, used to be taught mainly through the literary works of these societies. For centuries, the great genres of epic poetry, history, and tragedy were our main channels into these extinct cultures. Extinct, but like the dinosaurs, strangely close to us too, because as human beings, we have told and retold their stories so many times in so many ways. In these stories, gods and humans struggle in similar situations. But we humans are never allowed to forget our mortal, fragile status. More often than not, when we forget our limitations, we fail. And so, since I am telling a story, let me begin in the traditional way. Once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a girl. She was shy. She was bookish. She loved her friends, but she also loved nothing more than climbing the boughs of a magnolia tree and sitting there for hours with a good book in her hands. As she grew up, she discovered that some stories are thousands of years old and are, therefore, a sort of portal into the past, into another dimension. This excited her. She went to university and studied these tales in their original languages, Latin and Greek. When she left, she just wanted to carry on reading stories, but she had to get a job. So she stayed close to books. She worked in publishing, in bookshops. She wrote reviews of books she'd read for magazines, and even tried to write a few of her own. When she was almost 30, it seemed a great age. A chance encounter with another teacher led her back to classics. She got a job at a famous boys' school in London. She couldn't believe how lucky she was. The buildings were beautiful, her colleagues were smart and funny, and the boys were interested and lively, outspoken and curious. She felt like she had struck gold. She didn't want to be a disciplinarian, like the horrible teachers she'd hated at school. She thought she could win the boys over by the force of her personality and the obvious brilliance of the subject matter. After all, she'd loved learning Latin and Greek. Why shouldn't these clever children be any different? It turns out that enthusiasm and friendliness, while perfectly good qualities in a more experienced teacher, are no good for the novice. The boys shamelessly took advantage of her kindness and patience. They would talk incessantly and never listened. The volume of noise coming from behind the closed door of her classroom was so thunderous that it disturbed the drum teacher in the next room. Quite an achievement. Sometimes the boys asked questions that weren't about Latin or Greek at all, but were far more provocative. Do you have a boyfriend, miss? Is your job on the line, miss? It is a painful thing to know you are blushing hard in front of 20 teenage boys. She managed to hide her tears from them, but wept in almost every other corner of the school. She felt ashamed, and she blamed anyone but herself. Sometime in her second year, she had a eureka moment. A colleague had been philosophizing. He said, "If you have a good class, it's because you make them good. If you have a bad class, it's because you make them bad." It took a while for his words to sink in. What he was describing was essentially an act of creation. A good lesson isn't down to chance. For example, your personality, or the weather on the day, or if the boys have had lunch or not. Although in time she would realize these things matter too. A good lesson is a path you choose to take. Of course, this also means that you have to take responsibility for the lessons that don't go so well. But if, like Pythagoras, you can take the view from above, appraise your successes and failures in a rational, almost detached manner. Her emotions, her fear that she was a bad teacher, were getting in the way of her being a good teacher. She had to take a step back, or a step up. The ancient Greeks carved two sayings on their most holy temple: "Know thyself and nothing in excess." At first sight, these mottos might not have much in common. But in fact, the idea of knowing yourself was for the Greeks synonymous with apprehending your mortal boundaries. This includes an awareness of your limitations, but so too of your possibilities. In other words, strive for what is uniquely possible for you. To me, that seems like a perfect definition of responsibility. And so, with the Greeks in mind, she took responsibility. But being responsible also means being courageous. She had to change her mindset and her routine. Children respond to wisdom and to moderation. They want to learn, to discover new things, but they also want to feel that someone is in control, you. She kept her voice low and saved her unbridled enthusiasm for moments when she knew they would appreciate her words. She told them what color ink to use, what to write on the front of their exercise books, what sort of line to form outside her classroom. Instead of going straight home after school, she stayed in her office for hours, crafting resources for the boys which she hoped would delight and divert them. And if a particular lesson didn't work out the way she'd planned, she'd calmly sit down and figure out why. She discovered something rather exciting. Teenagers have short memories. One bad lesson doesn't mean the next one will be too. And she discovered that it was possible to foster this same insouciance in herself. By the time she left that school, she had reached a point where she could examine all her failures and accomplishments in the same interested, detached way. She didn't feel the highs of success or the lows of failure anymore. Every one of her actions became a learning opportunity. Yes, the little girl from the story grew up. She found that wisdom is a tree that you can cultivate. Measure your plot. Grow what's right for the soil. Control what you can. Have the courage to try something new from time to time. Now I can sit in that tree and read all the books I want. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lalya. That was lovely. I appreciate those thoughts. Next up is Elizabeth Azide. Elizabeth is a marketer and writer based in Austin, Texas. By day, Elizabeth currently spearheads international marketing efforts for a growing software company. In 2016, she started a public writing project called The Philosophy of Everything, a long-form blog dedicated to capturing how perspectives grounded in practical philosophy can optimize a particular area of daily life. Elizabeth will be speaking on Passage as Power, Freedom Through a Right View of Time. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Brittany, and hello, everyone. What a fabulous day so far. Super excited to be here. I'm Elizabeth Azide. I'm coming to you live from my Stoic kitchen, which is a term I've coined because my dining desk is in front of my kitchen. As Brittany shared, I'm a writer and marketer based in Austin, Texas, and I'm going to open with a story. As mentioned, I live in Austin. And about 3.5 months ago, we went through something that will forever be known as the Great Winter Outage of 2021. For the better part of a week, longer for some, over 50% of homes had no power, water, or heat. I was in that half. Outside temperatures hovered well below freezing, think 10 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 12 degrees Celsius, with most of the state covered in snow and ice. Now, if you know Texas, you know we don't do well in snow and ice. We're simply not equipped for it. Now, as someone with a particular disposition toward optimism, I thought, surely this is ending soon. Any moment, any hour now, the power, lights, heat, and water will come back. After about 2 days of thinking that on loop while sitting in my increasingly colder apartment, down to maybe half a cup of water left, I realized this may not end as soon as I'd prefer it to, but it will end. And so how do I get through it? I have Stoic training to thank for this much needed mental shift. There's no place more suited for the practice of philosophy than where you now find yourself, the Stoics say. I found myself cold, low on resources, and it was time to practice. Philosopher Sciacca implores us to seize what flies past, though in honesty, we're not going to want to seize everything. I speak for most of Texas when I say that no one wanted to seize that outage. That's when we persist. We persist in the knowledge that time only moves forward. And in that knowledge alone is the power to determine what's demanded of you right now. We are to anchor in the knowledge that time only moves forward. The technical definition of progress is forward or onward movement toward a destination. Fundamentally, progress is continuance. It is the process of proceeding, not explicitly positively or negatively, but just continuing. Time as we know it is the mechanism of continuing. This is something I've decided to call the inevitability of progress. We don't know what will come, only that it will. And so how do I want to arrive to it? Better or worse? That is the line of questioning worth considering. How do I want to be shaped by this? Who do I want to become through this? As experiences go, either the situation evolves or we do. Passage as power is harnessing that future freedom now. Everything is always changing, and everything you know now will one day be different. Of course, depending on your now, that has the potential to be either freeing or terrifying. The beauty of passage as power is that it enables us to understand how to gain the most from either sensation. While history tends to be cyclical, the content of our short spans of individual life is ever evolving. Okay, so most of us have likely been asked or perhaps pondered in some casual setting or another, what superpower we'd want to have if we could have one. Firstly, I'll let you all know right here and now that the answer is always teleportation. There is a right answer, and it's that one. What some may not know, though, is that a thoughtfully employed conscious awareness of time is in itself something of a superpower. The ability to project yourself beyond a moment, powered by an intimate awareness of its inevitable passage. While especially useful in the more trying seasons, this isn't only a means of overcoming frustration. A conscious awareness of time also encourages and enables appreciation, the savoring of that conversation, that concert, that cool breeze, that comfort brought about by the presence of those you love. It grants us the freedom to both appreciate by being truly present, hanging on the moment precisely because you don't know when or if it will come again, and the freedom to persist well, knowing that everything is always changing. Awareness at this level forms the foundation of one of my favorite concepts within Stoicism. It's this sort of simultaneous meta-existence where we're encouraged to live both within and beyond a moment, also known as the view from above technique. Bit of a theme today, that one. It's where you visually zoom out high and wide enough to see just how small the space we occupy is. Our goal is to be present and give what's necessary, but to not mistakenly magnify a moment so much that we lose sight of anything else. Accordingly, we can be content in giving and extracting from the moment what it's worth and pressing forward from there. A conscious awareness of time also reminds us that we don't need to experience everything it is we want right now, and that we're not less right now because we don't have certain things. Life is long enough, and it has been given in sufficiently generous measure, Seneca says. As a season inevitably folds into another, our only true task is to live that present season well, knowing we'll be better served in the next precisely because we did so. We're then free to live as Marcus Aurelius encourages here, reverently contented with our present lot, deeply assured that nothing is ever missing, and really all is bonus. Perspective in the moment allows for productive existence in and progression through that moment. We don't always decide the moments we're given, but we do decide how we operate and respond within them. This is fundamentally Stoicism. A right view of time frees us to see the best in and make the best of wherever and whenever it is we find ourselves. It enables us to conjure strengths and perspectives we may not have known we were capable of. Passage as power is strength, appreciation, perspective, and persistence in the moment, and freedom from the tyranny of the moment when needed. It's actively remembering that this too shall pass. And so, what is it worth? What learning am I meant to avail myself to? Whether the season is precious or filled with immense pressure, our acute awareness of the passage of time equips us to ask, am I to enjoy or endure? And to progress accordingly. Seize or persist. If it is unbearable, it carries us off. If it persists, it can be endured, Aurelius says. A right view of time, most simply, is that which enables emotional transcendence over any one thing and the utmost presence when it counts. Do you suppose that human life can seem any great matter to a man of elevated mind who has embraced the whole of time and the whole of reality in his thoughts? Marcus Aurelius. Count on a Roman emperor to say it best. May time's passage be our power. Thank you.
Elizabeth, we're all kind of wowing in the chat box at this really profound piece. You've got wows in there. There's like wows everywhere. Thank you so much for this. Moving on to Sophia Shapira. Hey, Sophia, whose talk we're really looking forward to. Sophia Shapira has dealt with autism, gender dysphoria, and to some extent attention deficit disorder for her entire life. In early adulthood, she discovered Stoicism to be a powerful tool in navigating and dealing with these challenges. During her nearly 2 decades working as a software developer, she began making YouTube videos and blog posts on a wide variety of topics, some of which include her experiences with Stoicism. Her talk today is really interesting. It's called Keeping Stoicism Relevant When Your Brain Doesn't Cooperate. Welcome, Sophia.
Thank you very much. Hello, fellow Stoics. This is Sophia. I am here to discuss how to keep Stoicism relevant even when your brain doesn't always do as it is told. The ancient Stoics believed that if you are fully trained in and follow the Stoic philosophy, your happiness will be unassailable. Marcus Aurelius, for example, wrote in Book 8 of his Meditations, "The mind which is free from passions is a citadel, for man has nothing more secure to which he can fly for refuge and for the future be inexpugnable." That quote taken from the George Long translation. Epictetus and other ancient Stoics are also recorded to have said much to the same effect. Most modern Stoics, however, tend to have far more realistic expectations of the philosophy. There are conditions that we know of today, such as attention deficit and autism, that can cause your mind, one of the things Epictetus categorizes as being truly one's own, to not always behave as you direct it to, for better or for worse. And even neurotypical people can often experience this, albeit to a later extent. Furthermore, the high degree of expectation that the ancient Stoics had for the philosophy were based on the premise that all of our desires and aversions are a result of us having judged some externals to be good and others to be bad. And while some of our desires and aversions may truly be just a product of such judgments, in the case of many of them, there is more to it than that. For example, is the reason why we fear death nothing more than us having judged it to be inherently bad? I'll tell you, I understand full well that life must have an end because it has a beginning, but I still find my mortality to be a little unnerving. Why? Because millions of years of evolution have hard-coded a strong desire for self-preservation into my very instincts. Other desires and aversions may have similar instinctual roots. Simply removing our judgments won't cause those desires and aversions to simply disappear. So, does this make Stoic philosophy pointless and futile? I think not. We may not be able to attain complete and total emotional invulnerability to external circumstance, but we can attain a significant degree of protection, and the further we get into the very core of our minds, the greater this protection can be. You see, from the moment that we set our core intention at the core of our mind to something, to the moment that some external event may or may not happen as a result, there's an entire chain of events. Each and every one of the events on this chain is an opportunity for some factor beyond our control to interfere with this chain of causality. The secret is to realize that each of these points is a place to erect a line of defense of your mind's inner citadel. This includes lines of defense that reside in the external world beyond our mind, but even after the exterior of our mind is breached, we still have opportunities to erect additional lines of defense to protect the very core of our minds. Understanding this can be helped by visualizing our locus of control as having layers, just like an onion, just like the ogres from Shrek. And I have some slides here to illustrate that. Let's see. How did the slides aren't working. It doesn't look like I'm having trouble with the
Sophia,
yeah,
I can try and share them for you if you like. Let's see how that goes.
Yes, please.
Shall I give it a go?
Yes,
Give me a
please, because
second.
I was having all of a sudden difficulties getting it done quickly as I thought. Please do so.
1 second.
Actually, I think I got it.
Oh, you got it? Want to give it a go?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, great.
I'm afraid I have to run through this faster than I'd ideally like. I've discussed it more in the past and plan to discuss it more in the future, but I'm going to run through this fairly quickly so that in hopes that I'll have time for everything. Let us suppose that I have an core intent to summon an elevator. I follow this up with the presence of mind to press the right button, and then that results in me making the motion to move my hand toward pressing that button, toward me actually pressing that button, and then the elevator coming to my floor. But there's a lot that can go wrong that isn't really stuff that I can control. Any stage this can go wrong. For example, despite my intent to summon the elevator, my attention deficit can cause me to get distracted from pressing the right button. I may have a physical injury that prevents me from moving my hand to press the button. And even if I do move my hand to press the button, it could be out of reach, thereby preventing me from actually pressing it. And finally, even if I actually press the button, the elevator system might be out of order. So of course, even if something interferes with the elevator coming, I will be a lot less distressed if I accepted from the get-go that I might not succeed in what I try. All that really is supposed to matter to the Stoic sage is that I did my part correctly. So what is this onion layer model needed for? Well, for starters, at times, it can give us a more clear understanding as to whether or not we did our part as best we could. For example, if despite your best intent to stay on task, you get distracted from pressing the elevator button, you can know better than to be too harsh on yourself. But that only deals with us being too self-critical if we fail to complete a task. How does any of that help us accept external things that are far more visibly out of our control, but which we, despite our best efforts at philosophy, still care about? Well, just as having the firm intent to summon the elevator increases the chances that I will remember to press the button, but it doesn't always work out that way, my removing my judgment from externals has the same effects on my desires and aversions. For example, I know full well that whether or not I have any friends is outside of my locus of control, so that shouldn't be a big deal to me. But as Marcus Aurelius keenly observed, humans are a social species, so I may not be able to completely escape a feeling of loneliness if I don't have friends. And I understand full well that death is not an inherently evil thing, and that even if it comes prematurely, that isn't in my control. Nonetheless, I still have an aversion to death. Why? Because of that self-preservation instinct that I mentioned earlier that is hard-coded into my DNA. But though I can't completely escape the assault of these feelings on my psyche, I can contain them. Part 9 of the Enchiridion records Epictetus as having said, lameness is an impediment to the leg, but not to the will. But with this onion model, we can also say that these negative feelings that I'm talking about are an impediment to the amygdala, but not to the will. And doing this creates another layer of defense for the inner citadel of my mind. I can't completely escape these undesirable feelings, but I can prevent them from gripping me to the core as they would otherwise. Does this mean that my fear of death won't reach me to my core at my last moments of life? Well, honestly, that question is hard to answer. So far, nobody has ever died and lived to tell the tale about it. But in every way that I can tell, this works. And that is why, even though Stoicism may not give us complete emotional invulnerability, it is still very useful and very relevant, even when our brain does not cooperate. Anyways, thank you so much for having me here. I hope that my talk was helpful to some of you.
Yes, thank you so much, Sophia. That was brilliant, actually. I love your model, the onion layers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And like Sophia points out, it's very important for us today to keep Stoicism fresh and relevant for our actual lives and for it to make sense to us. So let's move on now to our final talk before the break. This is our only talk today from partners who not only present together and work together, but are actually married to each other. This talk on Stoicism as a basis for a solid marriage is from Andi, Sciacca, and Greg Sadler. Andi,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Sorry, go ahead, Brittany.
Thank you for being here. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that Andi is currently leading the development of the MKE Food School. She also teaches for the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design and is a program designer and capstone faculty for the graduate division of the Culinary Institute of America, where she develops and leads courses on innovation and entrepreneurship. She enjoys helping others leverage opportunities to connect and flourish, and she finds great value in applying lessons from Stoicism to daily life. Greg Sadler is president of the philosophical consulting company Reason.io, where he helps clients put philosophy into practice. He's founder of a popular YouTube philosophy channel that has over 100,000 subscribers and is co-host of the Wisdom for Life radio show. Greg, along with Andi, is a team member of Modern Stoicism and is also adjunct professor at Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. Greg and Andi will be speaking for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take your questions for about 10 minutes. And we'll invite you at that time to add your questions into the chat box. So thank you very much for joining us, Andi and Greg.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate the thorough introduction as well. So as Brittany was saying, my name is Andi Sciacca, and my husband, partner, and friend, Greg Sadler, is upstairs. We're sharing an internet connection. So if one of us goes out, bear with us. Sometimes I have to turn off my video, but I think we're in good stead right now. So I wanted to just share a little bit about myself and then turn it over to Greg, and then we'll go through a few exercises that we had in mind before opening it up for conversation. And we really do hope that this is a conversation, not just a presentation. We don't have slides. We're just going to chat with all of you. But as Brittany was saying, I am an educator. I'm a mentor. I work in ed tech and in food tech. And I have found great application for Stoic philosophy and Stoic thought in the work that I do, both in leading teams, but also in being a part of a team. And it's been my absolute joy to work with Greg on various versions of this presentation. We've talked about using Stoicism in the workplace. We've talked about using it in partnered relationships that are romantic, non-romantic, family, how to blend a family, how to work with one another in productive ways. So I'm very excited to be here today. And with that, I'll hand it over to Greg to tell you a little bit more about himself.
Yeah, so I think many of you know me from being part of the Modern Stoicism team and presenting at Stoicons and things like that. I apologize for the crazy sunlight that's coming in. I think I'm going to have to move slightly. There we go. We're in our apartment and there's a skylight there. So I've been editor of Stoicism Today for about 6 years. I've got some big news about that. I'm bringing on an assistant editor within this month, which is kind of a cool thing because we're thinking succession planning. Andi and I have been married it'll be 10 years this year in November, and we've known each other since 1985. So we've crossed paths a lot. We got involved romantically without realizing that we were in very early 2010, and it's just been going from there. And I will say this actually, sort of to set the stage, Andi and I are both people who really needed to learn things from Stoicism because we're both, you could say, we talk about type A personalities. we might be double A's or triple A's. And when you put two people like that together, it can often be very, fun. There's a lot of sparks that fly, but it's very easy to get caught up in the kinds of things that often disable relationships, not just marriages, but any sort of partnered relationships. And it could be romantic, it could be friendships, it could be business relationships where both people are, kind of trying to decide what's going on and tell the other person how it is and things like that. So I think some of the exercises that we're going to talk about bear upon that. And I guess you could say that if it can work for us, it can work for just about anybody, because we're sort of a hard test case, you might say.
That's a great way to put it, Greg. Very diplomatic. I think that leads me to sort of my next point, which is, how I came to find Stoicism. And how I found it useful to me. So Greg was very kind to call us the AAA personality. For me, I've always had a very strong core of control and a need for control and a sort of desire to exercise control. And, working with Greg as a partner, but also as sort of a fellow student of this philosophy and, really looking at it more closely, is something that I think has helped me in many areas of my life, but in particular our partnership, in particular our marriage. And we do want to dive into that, of course. But I thought we might start with just sort of how we came to Stoic practice and Stoic study. And I'd ask Greg to share first, in part because my way into this was through Greg. So Greg, if you could just introduce this a little bit.
Yeah, so I got introduced to it in college and then didn't pay much attention to what I was actually reading, as many college students do. Those of us who teach know that. But it's, it sets some seeds. And in graduate school, I was very interested in questions about how we form habits and virtue ethics. And so I read Epictetus quite a bit for that. And then I started getting really interested around, say, about 2002 in what philosophical works and thinkers could contribute to anger management. And I was doing that out of a very self-centered reason. I was running into a lot of problems with my own anger and needed to work on that. And, psychology is very nice, but a lot of times it's quite often borrowed from philosophy, which it spun out of. And I found in the Stoics, along with others, some incredible resources. And then, so that kind of suckered me in, and I got more interested in other topics, as one should. And it wasn't all about anger management after a while, but about the larger Stoic system. And I guess that's really about it.
So I, as I said, came into this through a suggestion that Greg made at a time that I was having, some real challenges in my work life.
Right.
We would joke that Greg actually was an unpaid employee of the place that I was working at the time, because I would come home and then every night talk about it with him. So he was kind of participating in the daily stresses. And Stoic Week was approaching, and we did the Stoic mindfulness and resilience training together. And I found that it was a really helpful practice, but I was surprised to find that it was actually impacting positively my personal relationships, not just my way of framing this particular challenge with work and the changes that were occurring there. And the topic of our talk is about what constitutes a solid marriage, or how you can use Stoicism to practice that. So perhaps it bears defining what we each think of in terms of what a solid marriage looks like. And for me, as Greg said, we first met in 1985 and became involved in 2010. Married in 2011. And, we've lived in very, very small spaces with many, many books and 2 big dogs and 2 cats and the 2 of us, and made a move across country back to Milwaukee in Wisconsin, where we're both from. We've changed positions. We've had losses, great losses in our life. And the solidness of our relationship and our marriage, I find, is actually based in its dynamism and the fact that it is a dynamic living thing. And we treat it as if it is its own sort of person that we share. A marriage is an entity that is both of us together. And so, there's so many ways in which, as I identified earlier, one of my chief issues of kind of confronting what I needed to adapt for myself was this desire to control circumstances. And when I was feeling that things were not working out as I'd like, my impulse was to go to tighten that control rather than recognize that there's a better way to do things. So through the practice of doing the journaling, the conversations about what we wanted our days to look like, what we reflected on in the evenings, thinking about how we might better treat some of the unexpected things that come our way, I feel that I was able to grow into a better partner in our marriage and to be a better friend to Greg, but also to be a better friend to myself and to learn better tools to really treat myself with the same compassion and empathy that I would hope to treat others. So for me, the solidness really is in its ability to grow with us as we grow and to invite kindness and understanding into our dialogue so that we're treasuring and kind of prioritizing that opportunity to connect more than, especially in the case of, argument or confrontation, that desire to win or to score. It's about something very different for me now, 10, 11 years in, than it was in the very beginning. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you to share some ideas as well.
Yeah, I actually wanted to focus in on a passage from Musonius Rufus, and I think this is one that a lot of people are very familiar with because it gets used quite a lot. He starts out by saying, the primary reason for marriage is making babies. And if you shave that sentence off, you get some really cool stuff, because that I think throws things into the wrong light. So he says, husband and wife should come together for the purpose of making a life in common and of procreating children, and furthermore of regarding all things in common between them and nothing peculiar or private to one or the other, not even their own bodies. And so, the having kids, if you do have kids, and Andi and I are not having kids of our own, although I brought 2 kids of my own into the marriage, and she brought her own 4-legged babies along as well, who we do treat very much like kids. This other stuff about regarding all things in common, that's very difficult to do, I think. And it's often easy to carve out little spaces for ourselves where the other person doesn't get to come in, and that's sort of a recipe for, as people say, growing apart, which happens down the line. Making a life in common, that's really important as well. I moved up to New York so we could do that. I was down in North Carolina at the time. I left a position where I was up for early tenure and promotion because we wanted to live a life in common. And he goes on and he says, the birth of a human being which results from such a union is to be sure something marvelous, but it is not yet enough for the relation of husband and wife, inasmuch as, quite apart from marriage, it could result from any other sexual union, just as in the case of animals. Making babies is really not the center of it. He says, in marriage there must, and now this is ideal, right? There must be above all perfect companionship and mutual love of husband and wife, both in health and sickness and under all conditions, since it was for desire for this as well as for having children both entered upon marriage. When we form with marriage, it can be formalized through vows and ceremonies and stuff like that, but you could apply this to any long-term monogamous committed relationship. Why do we get into it in the first place? We get into it to have all this stuff together. I think a lot of times people lose track of that, and so it might be important every once in a while to check back in and say, what are we doing here? What's the point of all of this? And so he goes on and he says, where then this love for each other is perfect and the two share it completely, each striving to outdo the other in devotion, the marriage is ideal and worthy of envy, for such a union is beautiful. And then he cautions, where each looks only to his own interests and neglects the other, or what is worse, when one is so minded and lives in the same house, but fixes his attention elsewhere and is not willing to pull together with his yoke-mate nor to agree, then the union is doomed to disaster, and though they live together, yet their common interests fare badly. Eventually they separate entirely, or they remain together and suffer what is worse than loneliness. Such a contemporary passage, and that's something that I I'll be quite honest, Andi and I have both gone through when things, when we would fight and things would be bad, it would be really lonely being in a tiny little apartment together. I'm not saying that we all have to try to immediately jump into this wonderful, beautiful, ideal, perfect love back and forth. But I think Musonius is actually onto something there, each trying to outdo the other in devotion, rather than just making it a, well, I do my thing and you do your thing, and they kind of balance out, or I'll do my thing only if you do your thing. Those are ways of looking at relationships that are bound to get us into trouble. So when it comes to solidity in marriage or relationships, I think this is a really helpful passage.
I think the other thing that we've talked about before when we've addressed this topic that I just want to come back to is the idea of Stoicism giving you the tools to use. So, I love that passage in part because of the outdoing, in devotion. I think that, as, Greg said, we have very strong personalities. And so our union as friends and as partners and as, husband and wife and all of these other things, as fellow thinkers, as people who facilitate conversations, it took some time to build into something that, was mutually respectful, that was allowing for us to have this back and forth rhythm, not because we wanted to compete with one another, but because we were so used to competing in the marketplace kind of ideas, and then learning how to map that onto a relationship that is built on trust and transparency and honesty. The fact that we do have a foundation strong enough that we can say things that might be uncomfortable to say to one another in a loving voice, that we encourage one another and challenge one another, and that we are not afraid to offer the tools to one another in times of conflict to remind one another and ourselves of what we ought to be doing in that case.
Which is not always well received.
No, quite honestly, like I wouldn't expect it to be, but I think the fact that we've gotten to the point that we can do that is a huge step for us. And so it's not always the practice, and certainly there's not perfection in this household, nor will there ever be. But we have found ways to disagree with one another more respectfully, to be more kind and compassionate, and to seek out perhaps a greater understanding of where the other person is coming from in ways that best reflect their personhood, not what we're trying to assign to them as our partner, as our, spouse, all of those things. So for me, that's been particularly helpful. And in part because I've seen relationships that have suffered from an unwillingness to do that. And I've seen discord in, whether it's a business relationship or a marriage. If you're not working together in the ways that these tools allow you to actually kind of both, pick up the tools and help your partner, but also yourself, I think you're missing out on some of the richest emotional sharing. It's not just a loneliness that you feel. Over years, that loneliness just becomes a chasm. And I think that, we fortunately, with both our conflict and our sort of partnership, and when things are really going great, continue to fill that well, so that we're not dying of thirst, even when we have those times that are leaving us less than content.
Yeah. We should jump and talk about an actual practice.
Why don't you do that, and then we can open it up for some conversation and questions.
So, one of the key, let me back up a little bit. One of the big ideas that gets put out there and a lot in modern Stoicism are the three disciplines that are coming from Epictetus. And these are not, these are basically just in Epictetus, but you can apply them quite well. And one of them is called the discipline of assent. And assent is a really important idea for Stoicism, namely that we're much of the time buying into things, and you can call them impressions, ideas, phenomena, judgments, whatever you want. We're buying into things that we probably shouldn't. And this doesn't mean that you have to be like perpetually skeptical and never let anything in. That would be kind of silly as well. That'd be imprudent. But there's a lot of cases where we misread what another person is either saying to us. This is actually quite common. We still do this today, where we have to check in with each other. We did it this morning, where Andi said something and I took the tone to be a certain way, and then we talked about it, and it goes vice versa as well. So learning to, as Epictetus says, when something is impressing itself on you, just take a pause, back up, and don't immediately respond to it, because if you do immediately respond to it, all of your old habits, all of your normal ways of thinking things out, which could be on par, could be correct, are going to get engaged, and pretty soon you've already gone not from point A to point B, but all the way down to point T or F or whatever it's going to be. And this is especially important when you get into conflicts, because there's a tendency in conflicts not just to be in conflict about the thing that you think you're in conflict about, but about all sorts of other things as well, and about how the other person's talking to you, and about who is getting to tell the stories or dominate the space, or whatever it happens to be. Or when somebody walks out of the room, are they basically giving you the finger and walking out, or are they actually taking needed space, right? All of these are involving our assumptions and judgments and what the Stoics call assent. So getting a handle on that, I think, is incredibly important. It has been very useful for us. I think there's good reasons why the Stoics stressed it so much, right? Because it is very useful for everybody else as well. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about as well, which is, there's a certain advance that gets made within Stoicism and also within psychotherapy when people say, oh, I'm not actually making somebody feel something, and they don't make me feel what I feel. And that's partially true. It's not so simple as going from its diametric opposite, which is you make me feel mad because you're doing this. You're, as we say, pushing my buttons and I'm just responding. But the other extreme of I'm totally responsible for how I feel, and nothing that anything on the outside does, including other people, has anything to do with it. There's a certain falsity to that as well. We're kind of in the middle as human beings. We are communal, we are social, we do respond to each other, we do pick up on things. And so Stoicism can help us, better understand that middle ground. We are in some degree responsible for how we make other people feel. If I give you the finger right now and then immediately get off of Zoom, I think a lot of you would, rightly say, that guy's a jerk. Why did he do that? I'm disappointed, I'm angry, or something like that. Did I make you do that? I mean, there is some responsibility on your side, but there's certain ways we can act in relation to each other. And so swinging back to relationships, if we know what sets other people off in relationships, we can stop doing that. That is something within our control, at least to some degree, right? It takes time to do that. Andi and I we could easily come up with hours and hours of examples of pushing each other's buttons over the years that we've managed to get away from. But I think all of you know what we're talking about. So those are some Stoic-based practices. They're not there right directly in the text, but it's Stoic-based practices that I think can be quite useful, that we have had some success in applying.
I think there's one other one too, just before we go to questions from the group. But and we've talked about this before, but the Epictetus quote about sort of not grabbing right at the feast and grabbing at things. I think for people like Greg and myself, who are both very quick to talk and very quick to talk quickly, oftentimes, maybe too quickly before we really listen and absorb, that grabbing has, for me, helped me think differently about how I have to try and say what I really need to say in the moment. And, taking that opportunity to walk away, taking that moment of pause, saying, this isn't the last conversation that I'm ever going to have with this guy. So I really don't need to make every single point about what it is that I'm feeling. We can count on the longevity. We can sort of till the soil for future conversations. And as long as we continue to nurture sort of that groundwork, it becomes that much easier to just for me personally to practice a patience that I did not have before starting and thinking through these things.
That's both of us, quite frankly.
Well,
yeah,
I will agree. We have learned patience, and we have learned better ways to connect as humans, but also to love each other more fully. And so I think we have some time for questions, unless Greg, you wanted to say one more thing quickly.
No, actually, let's do that. Let's jump right into questions and answers, because we don't have that much time.
Yeah.
We try to get in as many as we can.
So I see a lot of really nice comments. Thank you for all of that.
Yeah, everyone, if you have comments or questions.
Are you both happy to moderate that yourselves?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. We've been Zooming before.
Yeah, I thought it'd be kind of nice to allow you guys to do that.
So Kai is asking if we have an online course on this. We're developing one. We've done a lot of workshops. I think it would be really helpful if we were able to, sort of put some of this into a course so that it was more accessible. So we've been working on that. There's some good recommendations on books, Connection to Nonviolence. Someone had asked if we would start, I think, a hotline, right, for Stoicism in marriage.
We would need a whole entire phone bank for that.
We would. We certainly would. Let's see. How do you deal with a boss who does not practice Stoicism? Oh, boy.
So,
and then there's one other question we probably have time for from Stoic Dan. So, Greg,
yeah.
I'll let you handle the boss first. And then.
Yeah, I mean, part of being a Stoic is to not expect anybody else to be a Stoic, right? And this doesn't just go for bosses. This goes for romantic partners. This goes for people on the street. It's imprudent to expect that because you are embracing a philosophy of life or a way of intentional living, that other people are going to adjust themselves to that. And Stoicism is there precisely to help you deal with jerk bosses. I've actually got an article out there, how to deal with unduly demanding people. These are the people who are never satisfied, and they keep on, you bring a report to them and they're like, oh, this is good, but you should have done this and this and this, So I would say the way that you deal as a Stoic with a non-Stoic boss is to double down on Stoicism, but also to keep reminding yourself, hey, just because I'm studying this doesn't mean that they're going to do that. And to come back to romantic relationships, Stoicism can be quite helpful for a person in a relationship where things are not ideal. But just because you embrace it doesn't mean that your spouse, partner, significant other has to embrace it, or even recognize or respect the fact that you are.
That's a great one. There's a question from Zoe that I would love to address, because this is a really, it's great for us to both answer. So I'll address first and then ask Greg. So Zoe asked, my partner and I have different pacing of getting things started or done. I'm more fast paced and may come across as not patient enough or like to take on too much within a short period of time. So Zoe, I am that person in our relationship. I remember early on in our marriage, we were working on something that was connected to a business topic. And I was doing this very sort of quick articulation, going through things very quickly. And I remember Greg said something like, you have to slow down, or he wanted to ask a question. And I responded very uncharitably and said, I think you should start taking notes, right? It was like one of those things where my attitude, yeah, great. So no, but my attitude was that I was the norm and he was somehow slower than the norm. And that's how I treated things. And, what we've come to find out about ourselves is that we both burn equally bright. I am sort of a firecracker personality. Greg is a slow burning ember. Greg provides the warmth and the stability. I provide all kinds of catalyzing, thinking. But over the last decade plus, I have learned to be more of an ember. I have learned the value of taking things more slowly, of asking questions, of having him be my counter, because every brainstormer needs someone who will sort of tether those strings afterward to the ground and say, this works, this doesn't, how do we move forward? So my answer to you, Zoe, would be, it's good for you to slow down, and it's good for you to try to match that pace. And it's good for you to think about what your goal is. Is your goal to get your thoughts out into the ether, or is your goal to build a connection with your partner? Because if the goal truly is to speak in a way that you and your partner can then take action or understand one another better, there needs to be that movement toward what the other person needs, because their needs are valid and equally important. Yeah. Greg?
I think that there's a part of her question as well that ties back to what you were talking about in terms of control. So in the end, I take on more responsibilities, but that sometimes takes a toll on my own mental health, makes me feel overwhelmed. Very common in relationships, right? Where one person will say, okay, if you're not going to do it, or you're not going to do it, on my terms, or I'm going to do it myself and I'll decide it. And then very often the other person, especially if they're easygoing, they're like, yeah, okay, you go ahead, and then you wind up with all of these things. And I can say that there are certain areas in our relationship where that easily happens. And then, there's a lot of areas like in the workplace where I'm the one who's the the driver, not so much with Andi, but when dealing with other people, where I'm like, okay, fine. If you're not going to like get on with this, I'll take it over. And then suddenly I find myself in a leadership role. Actually, that happens to Andi too, right?
Yeah.
And that can lead to a lot of issues. And so the notion of control or what's up to us, I think, can be very helpful. Sometimes it is okay just to let things be, screwed up in chaos, and let people muddle through and not step in and take it over when you're the person who's likely to do that. And that doesn't mean that you should do that in every case, but you can break the habit of like always being the person to step forward, and then you can do it prudentially. You can choose to when it's a good time and when it's not a good time.
And learning to ask for help. I'll say that's the other thing that I've really gained a great deal from thinking about things differently through Stoicism and practicing in our marriage, is that, a desire to ask for help is not born out of a weakness. And that was something that I had to really rethink. It's actually a moment of self-awareness, an opportunity to connect with others, an opportunity to build together, and articulating that need and saying it in ways that are receptive as feedback for another person, but also for yourself. So I still, right, as Greg said, we still both do that a lot, in part because we are in such driver roles within the work that we do, that sometimes we have to remind one another to put down the driver stick or
let somebody else do it, right?
And, exactly. Yeah. But I think we're at time. I just want to say thank you to everyone. It's been a great event. We've really enjoyed listening in, and we'll continue to listen in. And thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us today.
Thank you to the Andi and Greg marriage hotline. We're going to need more of you both. Thank you so much. That was just really great. And everyone really enjoyed it in the chat box if you want to have a quick look. Okay, everyone. Well, we've made it this far, and it is time to take a brief break. We're going to have a 15-minute refreshment break or a comfort break, whatever you need right now. And we'll be back at 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. British time, and 10 a.m. Pacific for our Connect and Chat breakout sessions. So when we return, we will also have our Stoic Women Book Bundle Prize drawing. I'm going to hopefully get that together in the background. So do check in to see who wins a bundle of 4 great Stoic books. We'll let you know a bit more later. So these breakout sessions, when you come back from the break, will give you a chance to chat with other conference attendees all over the world. We'll have about 8 rooms, and there'll be sort of the kitchen, the salon, the garden, the library, the porch. We're going to have a women's only meeting room if that's what you would prefer. Please, of course, remember to be polite and use good Zoom etiquette as you get to know everyone else in the room. You can easily switch between rooms, we think. What you'll have to do is look at the bottom of your Zoom application for the breakout room feature, and you can join any of those rooms. I and Brittany and Anne, who's our moderator here, we're going to be in the lobby, this space here, to help out if you need to get taken to a room. So that's going to be a 30 minutes after our 15-minute break, and then we'll resume conference sessions. If you need any assistance during this time, please find us here in this space or email hello@PathsToFlourishing.org. Otherwise, enjoy, and we'll see you back here at 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. British, and 10 a.m. Pacific for our breakout sessions. Enjoy. Take a good break. See you soon.